Yes, I do. 7 minutes. Thank you. Yes.
Josie probably will not be here. The next case is starting in the next few minutes. Okay. Okay. So why I know.
Okay, are we ready to start?
Are you ready, Colton?
Hold on.
Okay.
Now we're ready to call to order the APRN committee agenda meeting for June 13th, 2023. And review of on-site packet. There was none. There was none. Okay, and then additions or revisions to the agenda.
Madam Chair, this is Carol, and I got a request to put this on the agenda after the agenda had been approved, so we can't really change it at that point. And that has to do with the nurse midwives and malpractice. And that request came from Jamie, who is on here, so we want to add that to the agenda.
Okay, what item number would that be? What item number would that be?
That would be under unfinished business, probably, because it kind of has to do with that APRN bill. What's going on with that? So I would say probably under 6.3, something like that.
Okay.
There.
And then do we have,
I move to approve the agenda as amended.
do we have a second?
I'll second it. This is Ben.
Thank you. Do we have to take a vote or just? All those who agree, say aye.
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 So added, we'll add that to the agenda. And then next item of business, is there any announcements? Okay. And then the approval from the March 21st, 2023 minutes. I reviewed those, but you guys did a fabulous job in my absence.
I didn't see you.
You just did additions or changes. Okay.
I move to approve the minutes from the March 21st, 2023 APRN committee meeting as written.
Need a second?
Don Gosnell, I second.
Okay, so we'll table that to the next meeting in September. Number 2 is the update on the CNM.
We didn't quite catch the last bit. You guys got muted.
Oh, which part? Oh, prescription monitoring program, the PMP committee report. Ben's unable to be here, so we'll table that till the September meeting. And then update, is that okay? Okay, then we'll get the update from the nurse midwives regulations.
And this is Carol Moreland. I've not heard anything from the Board of Healing Arts about this. Jamie, do you know, has that advisory committee met or done anything more on this?
They met once back in March, maybe. I think it was after that we met, but I haven't heard any updates.
So we haven't, I think there's like 1 or 2 regulations still, correct, Jamie?
Yes, that's correct.
I haven't heard anything, an update on either one of those.
All right then, on to number 3, continue the implementation of House Bill 2279, APR and board approved dental certification organizations, and then we're going to do the midwives insurance.
Yes. As far as the national certification, this becomes effective July 1st of this year. And what that says as a reminder is for initial APRN licensure from that date forward, they have to have proof of national certification in their role and their population focus. For the ones that were licensed before that date, which would be all of them that are licensed right now, they may provide that information at the time of licensure renewal. So what we needed to do, and we kind of worked on this, is to get a list of approved national certification. And actually, this was approved in March. So we have it ready to put on our website because the application will change just a little bit to ask for that information. So we're waiting a little bit closer till July 1st to put all that information out there. But I think we're ready to go with that. And then what I will do is if someone requests that another national certification be approved by the board, there was that criteria that we looked at. And so I could gather information about that other organization and then bring it back to a committee meeting and you all could look at it if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great, since that's laid down the other ones, that sounds perfect.
Other than that, the other thing that's out there is the nurse midwives and their malpractice insurance. And Jamie can jump in here in a few, but kind of what's been communicated to me is that as long as they have an active license, nurse midwives, an active license with us, they have to pay into the healthcare stabilization fund. Okay, there was language put in that bill and it's in 651130, in which it gives 3 exemptions for someone who's not providing clinical services. I think that's the word, professional clinical services. I don't have it right in front of me. And so there's been some requests brought to us that we do something different with the nurse midwife licensure, because some of, and I think this affects Jamie, I think some of them are wanting to maybe go out of clinical practice and more into academia. So they would still have to pay into healthcare stabilization because they have an active license. And the authority that we have is like active license, inactive license, lapsed, and exempt. And we don't have a license for active academia or something along that line. So I've talked to Clark, who is here from Healthcare Stabilization. I asked him to come. And I don't know if Charles is on Zoom. Charles Bashir, is he on? Because he's our legal counsel, and I've also talked to him to see what authority we have based on the Nurse Practice Act that we can do with this. So Jamie, I don't know if you want to say anything while we're getting Charles in and stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. The biggest issue is that there has not been a malpractice carrier that participates in the healthcare stabilization fund. And so they're working on that, getting one carrier, but that still has not happened. And so the other issue is that because there's no malpractice carrier, you have to maintain malpractice. So you have to go through what's called the Kansas Availability Fund, which is set by the Kansas legislature as far as rates. And they have one rate for nurse midwives, which is almost double what a normal premium would be. So mine is like $13,000 a year. And so if I'm not practicing clinically, which I won't be after July, I'll be just working in academia. I still have to find a way to pay into that, which is a huge problem for a lot of nurse midwives. It's also a problem if you're retired, if you're in between jobs, maybe you have a baby and you're not practicing. So I'm not sure, there's a couple, those exemptions don't fit for that. And then the only option is to put your license as inactive, which then you can't be on boards. I have to maintain an active license to be the director of this program at the university. So I feel like it's going to come up as more of an issue in the next couple years for sure. And I think it's going to come up as an issue for other APRNs as well that are not practicing. They don't have to participate in the healthcare stabilization fund, but they'll still have to maintain that malpractice because there's not an exemption for like academia, even though it says if you're not rendering clinical services.
Jamie, I have a question on that. When you say you're going to be in academia only, can you explain what that will cover?
Yeah, so I'm just the director of the graduate nursing program. And so I'm not doing any clinical services. I'm not doing supervising clinicals for students or anything like that. So a lot of times, I know when I worked at the health department, it's covered under state tort. So I'm not sure why public universities that are employees of the state of Kansas aren't covered under state tort as well, which is an exemption.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. That's kind of over my head. Clark, I don't know, or Clark or Charles, do either one of you want to weigh in on this at all or have anything that you want to say or?
This is Clark Schultz.
Yes,
Okay,
I think probably we can hear you better then. And it may turn and show you too.
the Clark Schultz of the Healthcare Stabilization Fund. In looking at the statutes as they currently exist, it looks to us that if the license is active, then you have to, if you're a healthcare provider, as defined in the statute, you have to obtain insurance, and then you also have to participate in the stabilization fund. It doesn't look as if there is an exemption for those who are teaching or in other capacities. For example, we have doctors who are actively licensed who are maybe a director at a hospital and certainly not rendering care, but they, because of the fact that they have an active license, still are required to obtain insurance and coverage from the stabilization fund. So I'm familiar with the issue that Jamie talks about and don't disagree with her. It probably would take statutory change in order for that to happen. That's the way it looks to us.
And when you say statutory change, is that on your end, our end, or how?
A legislative change, whoever
Okay.
were to introduce a bill and shepherd that through the legislative process. And so obviously interested parties do that.
I think part of the problem, Jamie, is there's no definition anywhere of clinical professional services or however that is termed. So I think that leaves a little bit up for interpretation. You know, it was never defined anyplace.
Mhm. And Clark, did you mention that there was different tiers for physicians? Like if they're practicing GYN only? I know that had been proposed maybe as a solution.
Yes, and thank you, Jamie. That is very true. We have different categories. The thing is, there isn't one for somebody who is going to teach, for example. It's, for example, if I'm a brain surgeon and I'm going to be the executive at a large hospital, I will have to obtain insurance for my skill level as a brain surgeon. So there isn't there aren't categories for somebody who is not going to be offering services. So that presents a problem. The reason it's set up for that is because I don't know that anybody necessarily anticipated that there would be a desire for this as there apparently is at this point.
So another email that came to me is, why can't the Board of Nursing then take an active nurse midwife license and split it into different categories? You know, one of them would be academia. One of them would be somebody who's practicing clinically, but they're not delivering babies. You know, it kind of goes into different categories. And I don't know, Charles, he's our legal counsel, if he wants to talk to that as far as the authority of what the Board of Nursing has to do with that. You want to say anything, Charles?
Yes,
or-
yes, this is Charles Macheers, counsel for the board. Again, as Clark was saying, that would probably require a change in the statutes to do that. So that's all I have to say about that. As far as not being able to be on the hospital board unless you're active, that might be a question if anyone ever does contemplate modifying the statutes, whether that should be covered by the hospital might be a question to ask.
My other question, this is Jamie Harrington, would be, would we be able to, if you put your license inactive, you have a period of 5 years before you have to either surrender your license or take a refresher course. So would it be possible that the Board of Nursing can make exempt categories for something like that? Or could you put your license as an exempt status?
If I'm understanding correctly, what you're asking is it possible for the Board of Nursing to have someone with an inactive license or an exempt that could still practice in that role, although maybe not in a clinical setting? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily practicing, but like in my situation, I have my family nurse practitioner, which is not subject to the healthcare stabilization fund. It's just subject to regular malpractice, which I could obtain pretty cheaply. So if I put my nurse midwife license as an exempt status because I'm not technically practicing, is there that option? Or if someone, you know, is retired and they don't want to lose their license, but they don't want to pay malpractice because they're not practicing. Does that make sense, I guess?
Yeah, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that if you were to do that, that you would not practice as a nurse midwife, period. As long as it's active or exempt. Is that
Correct. But I wouldn't want to lose my license that I've gone to school for.
right, yeah. I can certainly look into that. I don't have all that in front of me at the moment, but you know, that may be an option. I don't know if everybody's gonna want that because they may want an active license, but you know, it kind of comes down to how that's defined in the Nurse Practice Act and all of that. So.
And I guess my last question would be, you know, something to look into for the attorney would be, are the universities, because they're public and their state of Kansas, are they covered under federal or a state tort, you know? Because if you work for a health department, you're covered under state tort as a healthcare provider.
Well, we can make a note of that and go research the Kansas Tort Claim Act and see what it says.
Thank you.
So, I can certainly look into the exempt and active.
Jamie, if you were, let's just say that worked and you were gonna be put in the exempt category, could you still be the director of your program?
Well, it's technically a family nurse practitioner program. It's not a midwife program. So if I was the director of a midwife program, then yes, I would need to maintain my nurse midwife. So I don't think it's an ideal solution, but it might be maybe a temporary solution I just feel like it's gonna come up. I already know several people that it's an issue for, several nurse midwives. And we have several, like a lot of our faculty is nurse practitioners. So one is a neonatal nurse practitioner and she is not actively practicing. She doesn't have to belong to the Healthcare Stabilization Fund, but her malpractice was around $3,000 a year. So for someone that's not practicing, that's still a significant cost when you're not practicing, I guess. So I think it will come about. I think we're going to probably see a lot more people that don't have malpractice and that are going to have to scramble to get malpractice when they come up for licensure renewal.
And see, part of it I see is when somebody, they're not practicing, okay, all we know is whether they have an active license or not, because we don't know where they work, if they're working and all of that. So, I mean, you could have them sign an affidavit or something that they're not practicing, but that could change and we wouldn't know anything. So, I don't know.
Well, in the Healthcare Stabilization Fund, where we're in that, us and CRNAs, they keep track of that pretty well. Because even when I changed over my malpractice, they knew about it. So from one company to the other.
Anybody else have anything to say on that?
Okay, well, if no other, we'll let Charles follow up with the state tort and we'll look into additional things that Carol has on her list. And we'll come and bring that back in September.
Thank you, Clark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so up next is a 5-year legislative review update. And there are a list that has to be done in the next 2 years for 90 of these legislative updates. And so if everybody's okay, if we could table this till September, so then that way when we start to look at these, we make sure that we're already not doubling the work and going back and that we have a checklist for September. Make it a little bit easier on the staff here if there's no major objections. Someone really wanted to get it done today.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll table the 5-year review until we get that list, and then we'll do that in September to help out the staff here. Okay, I have a motion. No, okay. Thank you. All right, number 7, new business. And the report on the APRN programs approved for licensure.
Yeah, that's on page 12 in your packet. There were 3 of them. They all met our requirements. So we did go ahead and license graduates from those programs since they met our requirements and everything.
Okay, great. And then number 2, we have the graduate preceptor qualifications, KAR 60-17-104.
Yeah, this starts on page 13 in your packet, and this is a letter that came to Janelle from Fort Hays. And Fort Hays is very interested in you discussing the possibility of having more who can be preceptors for APRN students. Right now, according to our regulation, which I believe is included in here on page 16, it says each preceptor or adjunct faculty shall be licensed as an advanced practice registered nurse or shall be licensed as a physician in the state in which the individual is currently practicing. Each preceptor shall complete a preceptor orientation, including information about the pedagogical aspects of the student preceptor relationship. So Fort Hays was very interested in expanding from just an APRN or a physician, expanding that to others who could be preceptors for APRN students, thinking more about the interdisciplinary and stuff like that. I think they were kind of thinking along the line of PAs, right, Yeah. And I don't know if there was anything in addition to that, but they were just wondering, I guess on a national level, it's probably seen as more than just an APRN or a physician who would be a good preceptor. So.
Does anybody have any thoughts about this? My one concern when I was thinking about this is that if we open up the definition of a preceptor, does that then open it up to the anesthesiologist assistants, if that should ever happen here in the state of Kansas? To precept, or are they just considered, I don't even know what their background is. And then if I'm remembering correctly, for the advanced practice nurse practitioners, we are allowed electives. I thought if there was something specific, I didn't know why this came from Fort Hays, like what was the thought process behind that?
When, just if I may,
Sure.
Chair, last time we went to do a site visit for their advanced practice program, and that was one of the things that came up, is they do have a couple of places where they place nurse practitioners because they're in Western Kansas where there are not APRNs available in certain spots, but there are PAs who are overseen by physicians, but it may be the PA that's actually at the clinical site doing the precepting. That didn't, sometimes the regulation in your head looks different than when you go back and look at it. So they had not looked that was why. That was one of the things we said they were going to have to find somebody other than currently with the way the regulation reads. So that's why they sent the letter, was thinking that there are some states that do allow PAs to precept because it's still a more advanced level than on our end. Some states allow like PhD, like in mental health, like PhD clinical psychologists will also can be preceptors for advanced practice. So it just kind of depends on how there probably other programs have been set up and their use of but because practitioners are limited in some of those places where they do have good clinical spots and they're hoping to get some APRNs out there, but they have been, have on occasion used the PAs and wondered what the difference was and why they would not be allowed. So that's why it came.
That's my question. I'm not an APRN, so can you just summarize the similarities and differences between the PA function and the APRN in the clinical arena? Is there some overlapping where they both share the same skills, advanced skills and stuff where they don't? Or would there be something outside the scope of the APRN or something that they shouldn't use?
It doesn't change now that we have House Bill 2279. We're now full practice authority, so we have more autonomy than PAs.
But in terms of their clinical practice, I don't know how.
Does anybody have any?
This is Jamie Harrington. I think from our perspective to it at our school is we've had students that have had a lot of difficulty finding sites. And so PA does overlap quite a bit. I mean, we do have full practice authority, whereas PAs have to have their stuff still signed off, but clinically we're functioning very similarly. So, and I guess I can't think of a specific example right now, but I think I can see sites where maybe specialty sites where a student can go and that site may not be a PA or an MD or a nurse practitioner, but they're still getting a lot of experience in that specialty site too. So, but I know specifically for PAs, I would definitely be for that.
I can see where they're coming from, that they're looking forward, because they're looking at interprofessional experiences, that's absolutely. I understand that, and that was a good idea about the PhD focus, the mental health area.
Right.
If that's a credential for them.
Yeah, mental health is a good example, or even public health, some of those sites, physical therapy, or I worked with speech language pathology, which I would have never thought would have been something relevant to me, but there was a lot of swallowing issues and identifying that as a nurse practitioner. So even they might be a good potential short-term preceptor. You wouldn't want all the experiences with that person, but
Exposure, it just really makes them well-rounded. That would be expanding their experiences. It sounds like a great idea.
This is Dawn Gosnell. The way I've always interpreted this, because I'm looking at page 16 and I'm looking at 3. But let's say I am the preceptor. I'm the one assigned to help guide this student through whatever clinical instructor it is. As an APRN and with a graduate degree, then I meet that requirement. Now, I can farm out, and that's probably not the best phrase. I'm trying to think, they've got a much better phrase here. I am helping that student coordinate their activity, and that coordination can be with others that are not an APRN or a physician, but I can coordinate that. But what it sounds like is they need to have a process in place where when they want to coordinate that activity with a PA or with a mental health, then who is that preceptor? Because again, I think part of the role of the preceptor is to make sure that they understand how they practice as an advanced practice nurse. I don't want them out there learning how to be a PA, but I can give them those clinical opportunities and coordinate that activity, but be a remote preceptor. So I guess I see that side of it. So, while I can, I want them to have that activity, but why not put together some kind of a process in your School of Nursing where you have that person that meets our number 3 regulation, and then they coordinate that activity for those practices. Am I just not understanding this? But that would be my impression. Yes.
Just one other thing that you made me think of, Dawn, in the conversation that came after that was that PAs do have to practice under a physician, and physicians are specifically mentioned in the regulation. So there was trying to make some way if maybe that's the connection, because it is the PA in the cases they were talking about, it was the PA providing the oversight of that clinical experience. And they were the ones getting the preceptor orientation. So understanding what the APRN role is, what their activities need to be. Because a physician has to have that too, because they're physicians and APRNs do practice differently. So I think their struggle was because they do practice similarly. You're right. We don't want them. It's not APRN. There are still some differences, but in the clinical setting, is the preceptor role well defined enough to allow a PA with those parameters that are already there to be able to practice. So I just wanted to add that piece, Dawn. You made me think of that when we were talking about that, the physician PA connection. But it's actually the PA who is the one present at the clinical site, while the physician could be somewhere else, even though they're the physician that signs off for the PA.
The physician is the preceptor, but they are coordinating that activity with their PA. And then that covers what we would need.
They would technically have to have the physician then be on record as the
I should say
preceptor.
that would be on the paperwork, huh?
Yeah, that would have to be.
That's how we kind of got around in the BSN programs too, and we couldn't find a BSN preceptor for everybody. We had a BSN preceptor in charge of the delegated side.
Yes.
It was the same concept in the BSN program that you're talking about. Did they think about that concept that Don just described, having, you know, the PAs could be underneath the physician's delegated guidance and still meet the criteria for preceptoring?
I don't think so.
It could be one of their staff, one of the faculty could be that preceptor and then just coordinating the activity out. And then, because you always then follow up with that activity. What kind of experiences are you getting? Are you doing the work that would qualify for your role? Yeah.
I mean, I think, at least I know at our institution, and I think it's pretty standard, you have a clinical faculty that's a nurse practitioner that fulfills that role that you're kind of talking about, Dawn. So I mean, they're not necessarily called a preceptor, but I mean, I agree with you. They do have that oversight of, you know, coordinating the different preceptors for the students. I just worry if you have to have the MD, you're still limiting, or the DO, you're limiting access potentially, because sometimes they don't always want to be responsible or sign off. That's the issue. So in the PA, even though they're signing off on the PA, that PA is agreeing independently, I guess, to take that student. So.
Another question, is this for all of their clinical sites, or was this just for a one or two?
It would just be, yeah, to allow them to use PAs in sites where that's really what they have in order to use those clinical sites. They wouldn't have another option, or, because I think your point was well made in terms of there is a clinical faculty who's always over that course, and they are responsible for evaluating the preceptor and the student, and they're overseeing, making sure they're getting the experiences they need. So adding the PA in as an option to be the preceptor, there's still a lot of oversight that happens for the preceptor from the clinical faculty as well. So this is really under the preceptor description, to allow that person to be someone who can fulfill that clinical oversight role. But there are still there are other things in place that bring the clinical APRN oversight from the program itself. And if that makes sense. They're already doing that. There has to be a clinical faculty person responsible for that. The preceptors are just providing the daily clinical because they might be 100 miles away on a clinical spot every day for 8 or 9, however many weeks they're there. Most of these are in primary care cases, not a specialty where they're going to go for maybe a couple weeks. It's like a longer term. It's a whole semester or whole class.
This is Carol, it just kind of seems to me like this is being interpreted different ways.
I know.
So I don't know if it needs some clarity or,
Exactly.
I mean, I see what Don's saying, but also, it seems to me that it's pretty clear, each preceptor shall be licensed as an APRN or as a physician.
But the one above it on B says each preceptor shall be licensed in the state. It missing a piece that says nurse practitioner. It doesn't say what kind of license, but then it does down on number 4.
Yeah, so I don't know if the language just needs some rework or what you think.
How many APRNs were with, so affecting quite a few.
I think well, I'm trying to remember, Carol, I can't remember. It wasn't all, it wasn't all of them. I'm trying to remember, I've done two other graduate programs since then. And that has not come up. I think it may be a rural issue as much as anything.
That's what it is.
Cause I'm thinking Wichita State and KU have done both of those since the other one, and I haven't seen that come up as an issue or a question. So part of it is too, just like providers in Western Kansas too, as we're looking at clinical programs for advanced practice.
We had several students, but then we saw the regulations said that, and we were like, we scrambled to change them over really quickly. And now it says specifically in all of our clinical paperwork, it can't be a PA. But it is a huge issue just because, well, we know we have lack of clinical sites, and definitely in rural and underserved areas for sure.
So do we want to give this some more thought or kind of gone back and forth and
Is there any more information that you need us to bring to you? I mean, I don't know if we could talk to the nursing programs and see who all has this issue and what their interpretation is, because it kind of sounds like Jamie was interpreting it the way we were, because they changed it. And so it could not be a PA, but then Dawn, kind of the way Dawn's interpreting it as like a coordinator and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if that would be helpful.
yeah, can we take a survey before we get going? We open up and changing,
Right.
That's definitely something.
or we're changing our definitions.
I guess what I was going to encourage is that the School of Nursing have someone who can be that preceptor and then can delegate out to and follow through, but delegating, coordinating that activity with that PA. But that, the PA is working with that student, but you have someone that is in advanced practice that is actually the preceptor of record, sort of thing. Because if that was me, I would be in touch with them and doing touch points on how that clinical activity is going, but I would meet the criteria. So, it's just having someone to be that preceptor of record and then coordinate with mental health or with the PAs, sort of thing, but have that person.
I would agree with Carol and figuring out how many programs this really is affecting, and if it's really, thank you, Dawn and Jamie, appreciate that, your insight as well. And really get a lay of the land and what's really going on and how this is affecting everyone, our programs. Anybody else want to add anything, or does that cover it? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion. Thank you. Okay, so next on the list is number 3, clinical hours requirement, KAR 60-17-105.
Okay, and that's on page 17 in your packet. And kind of what started this is National Council, State Boards of Nursing was surveying the boards of nursing about the number of clinical hours required in their advanced practice programs. And, we require a minimum of 500. And there's been discussion throughout the years that perhaps that's too low, but nobody has ever really changed it or anything. Well, 500 is not the national normal. In the 2022 National Task Force on Quality Nurse Practitioner Education, it is really saying a minimum of 750 direct care clinical hours. Now simulation, they say simulation is not, they do not consider it direct patient care. So simulation would not be included in those 750 direct patient care totals. So that's why I brought this, because it appears that maybe we're not exactly the same as national. And so I just wanted to bring it to your attention, and if you wanted anything done or don't, or whatever. I just want to make you aware of it.
Should we look at the programs we have in the state of Kansas and, or do we have, or is
We
everybody?
did
500?
survey some of them. I
Right.
had Janelle-
All of our programs need it. Even we have 2 MSN programs, which we're kind of concerned because theirs are a little bit lower, but one of them has been below 750, but they just recently made changes, and that's going to increase. So they're gonna meet that. So I think and the other standard, because there was another group that I had talked with, because we were talking about clinical hours, and they were saying that and I think it might be an accreditation standard with one of them is 1,000 hours. But that might be inclusive of simulation. So 750, like Carol brought up the quality and practitioner programs from 2022. That has been, I mean, I think accreditation is pushing that envelope too, and I don't think you're going to find any. We had a couple, I see them at 650, 600, 650, and they're just not quite making the cutoff. But the Kansas programs, I think, are going to be okay.
Yeah, it would
with that.
probably affect some of those graduates from out of state nursing programs. However, theirs is probably gonna change too.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. Because this is more of a national trend. So it would not create problems for any of the Kansas advanced practice nursing programs. They would be fine if it was 750, a minimum.
750. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Concerns? Going forward. So in order to update this article.
This is just a regulation.
It's just a regulation.
It's just a regulation. I don't think I can look in the statute, but this would be what I could do if you wanted it 750. Then I can work on a revision and bring it to September. And you guys could look at it, and then it would just be a matter of whether you wanted it to go ahead in the approval process or not. That's the regulation.
Anybody have any questions or concerns? I mean, as long as we're not pitching any of our schools of nursing and everybody's pretty much there already, just updating our regulations would be good. To show that we're going with the national spend.
That's a good idea.
Okay, then yes, please, Carol, if you would do that for us for September,
Okay.
greatly appreciate it.
Do that.
Okay, so we've got quite the agenda for September. Number 8. So we will do the 5-year legislation review update. We will update our clinical hours and the regulation 60-17-105. We'll get that survey on the preceptors. See if there's anything additional needs to be done with that, and then we'll definitely be updated on the PMP committee report from Shannon. Anything else on this one? Okay. Is there anything else we need to discuss before we adjourn? We need a motion to adjourn. Okay, there's nothing else. Then thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.